Ticker. This is Import Export with Lawrence Christophels.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Import Export here on Ticker. Today we've got some fantastic guests as always. We've got a feature-packed episode. So to kick it all off, we've got Gabriel Edwards, who's an associate partner from Fisher Leadership, to talk about some really important stuff around work-life balance, stress management. So I'll kick straight off. Thanks so much, Gabriel, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Lawrence.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background and why you started doing what you're doing with this role?
Absolutely. I have a background of working with leaders across many different sectors for many years in the people advisory space. But I also have a background as a counsellor. So in the work I've been doing with leaders, I've noticed over sort of the last 5 to 10 years a real spike in rates of anxiety and depression and the impacts of constant change and complexity on our leaders' journey. Yep. So I've really sort of focused in on creating great mental health and wellbeing support resources and programs exclusively for our leaders. Yep. And working with Fisher Leadership, we've been able to design one only mental health and wellbeing program for leaders in this country. Yep. Because we're really well aware at the moment of the statistics coming out about mental health in our community. Yep. So 1 in 5 Australians is actually suffering from a mental illness of some kind. Yeah. Now, if we look at that from a workplace context, only 3.5% of our workers are tapping into mental health support provided by their employers. Yeah. And a lot of the time it's the employers themselves who they can't put their hand up or they feel they can't. Look, this is it, that while it's only 3.5% of workers who ask for help, it's only 1.1% of our CEOs and executives. Now, the space that they work in is high pressure, more of a public face, changing technology, the fact that technology now makes them the expectation that they are contactable on demand all the time, augmentation of roles, and also the stress to balance economic output with social and environmental output. Well, that's why it was so important to have you on the show, Gabriel, because just in a domestic business, all those stresses are there and the pressures are there. But then when you overlay the international trade, when you like different cultures, different time zones, you have to learn a whole new way of doing business in many cases. And every country has got certain nuances that you need to be abreast of. And those commercial impacts are real. And I know firsthand as well, it puts pressure on relationships when you're getting phone calls in the middle of the night or you do a Skype call or you need a lot of travel. There's a lot of things that international business adds so many extra layers of stress and anxiety around their work-life balance. It's so true. And in this particular industry, the complexity of the industry is, quite incredible in itself. Yeah. And it's rapidly changing. Yeah. So on top of what you've just said about sort of that day-to-day experience, the backdrop is, sort of global climate, economic, political changes, complexity of regulation and compliance on top of having to work across different time zones. So I think, when I work with leaders, when I work with leaders, say in Australia, we talk about carving a space out for you to be your human self. You're more than the job you do each day. When I work with leaders in your industry, it is absolutely imperative that they carve out those spaces to maintain health and well-being. So what that means is, if you have a schedule and you're working across different time zones, what you have to do is schedule in space for your mind health, your body health, your relationship health, and for things like hobbies and interests and learning. And that kind of sounds like a nice to have, but it's actually an essential to have for mental health. Yeah. So one thing that, one of the first points you can go to is actually technology. Wow. Now, sometimes our devices are vices, as we know. It's that kind of the world through here. But if we use technology to support the space we need for our mental health, then it's a good thing. So there's some fantastic apps and programs which a lot of leaders in this industry should be using, where you can get on the same platform with your customers and it manages your time zones. It tells you when is the right time for meetings. It coordinates the different patterns and times and rhythms of, you know, the people that you're communicating with.
Sure.
And so within a platform like that, what I would say is, yes, have your meetings scheduled, have your conferences scheduled, but also schedule as a high priority that time with your family when you're putting the kids to bed, that time when you need to stop and meditate and read, when you're going to go out and walk in nature. Just as important for you to sustain and maintain your performance as that meeting.
I think a great example of that I've been noticing over the last few years is especially in sport. I mean, in Australia, sports, obviously we're all sport mad here, but in Victoria, probably the worst out of all the states. And you look at, you know, the AFL players that have come forward and have talked about their struggles and how they've been supported and how important it is. And they're under high pressure roles, obviously, so very similar to CEOs and senior management. And I think now people are embracing. In the past, you know, the consensus could have been, oh, look, you know, you just need to toughen up a bit. But now there is a real cost associated with not looking after yourself properly.
Absolutely, and the program that, you know, that I've created and we've created at Fisher Leadership, it really is focusing on supporting leaders to maintain the balance of the job you do with your health, your relationships, and your sense of self. And without that, we do end up with burnout, depression. When you're stressed and sleep deprived,
you don't make the best decisions.
You don't make the best decisions. So look at the context within which, you know, this industry, where our leaders are working in this industry. You need clarity of thought. You need to maintain positive relationships. So it really is worth stopping, setting up the technology around you to support the space you need to look after those aspects that feed your mental health.
I think what I've noticed is that especially people who are younger in the journey, especially now we have so many young entrepreneurs, which is fantastic, really young, innovative, dynamic leaders coming through. And, you know, I hear them, and I've lived it myself, is that you think, oh yeah, when things are better, then I'll have more time for myself. It's always that, you know, as an outcome versus making it part of the progress. Whereas you look at the leaders like, you know, your Bransons and all the global success stories, they've been saying this for all of us for decades.
They have. And look, I was had a session one-on-one with a CEO this week who's running a sales business that covers the Southern Hemisphere. Wow. He's young and he's a real success story, but he thinks he can do it all himself.
Exactly. Yeah.
So he's managing his own diary. When he's at the gym or when he's riding his bike and trying to get time out, he's thinking, I must do this, I must do this. So when we actually looked at Richard Branson as a model, Richard Branson has a team. I know he has the funds for it. He has a team of assistants. He knows what he's really good at and how to prioritise his time and focus on what he's good at and how to delegate and create the resources around you to cover off those things that sap your energy. And I think I'm hoping that young generation of leaders coming through will learn, as some of us didn't, we learnt the hard way. I'm hoping that the young ones will learn that they need to prioritise their health and their relationships alongside their professional advancement and their learning.
I wanted to ask you something else, Gabriel, again related to international business, especially now with remote work. So in the past, it was easier, not easy, but easier to say, okay, I'm going to go to work 9 to 5, come back, and I'm going to put the computer away. But now, you'll actually, whether you're travelling through business or overseas, or even just here in Australia, most people now actually, there's great benefits in flexible working conditions, remote working, but at the same time, because it is so flexible and available, how do you, it makes it more pressure to actually segment that part of your life.
It does. It asks for you to take control. So there's two ways to handle that wonderful flexibility. One is to let that flexibility drive you, and the other option is to control it yourself. So it actually requires you to be far more structured and to put in place and use the technology there to carve out the space that's a no-go zone for work. Whether that's sleep, time with family, time with friends, you actually have to put that into whatever mechanisms you're using.
Your diary
so,
or whatever,
and that ends up, those boundaries end up being communicated to the people that you're
and they learn
working
to adapt to
with.
that.
They absolutely do, and actually it's a role modelling too.
True.
You know.
Can I ask? We've got to close off this segment, but can you tell us very quickly about the program, how they can get in touch with you, and how long it runs for, and so forth?
Absolutely. Look, as I said, it's one of a kind, and we need it at the moment in this country. So it's a 12-month program. I like to call it a wraparound program. It's called Breathing Space. It's either one-to-one with an executive, or it's with an executive team. And what we do is we work on preventing mental illness, we provide learning and education, and then background support. So it's one-to-one regular debriefs and reflection with a leader. It's team workshops around areas that they want to learn about to do with mental health. There's a great resource portal, and we're working with Beyond Blue on sharing content. There's a reflection journal, and it's a 12-month journey that then impacts the organisation. It's what we call working from the inside out.
Fantastic.
And when the program's finished, we have touch points with those leaders. And one of the great things about it is that up front we use wearable technology and psychosocial survey to get a baseline of where you are as a leader, which is kind of exciting and makes you mindful of yourself. And then we work with you over 12 months to prevent mental illness, to increase awareness, and to gradually improve mental health of a workplace.
Love it. Great. Thanks so much, Gabriel. It's been an absolute pleasure, but also a really important reminder for all of us, myself included, that we really need to take more time out for ourselves. And it does pay dividends from a bottom line perspective in the business as well.
Absolutely. Well, it's $12 billion cost to mental illness off business bottom line in Australia. So that's just one, let alone the community and families. So absolute pleasure.
Great.
Thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you, and can't encourage anyone enough to get along. Reach out to Gabriel. We'll have the details, and invest in yourself, invest in your business, because it will pay massive dividends, personally and professionally.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gabriel.
Stay well.
Yep, likewise.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks so much. Join us after the break, where we've got the Trade Commissioner from Korea here in studio with us straight after the break. So look forward to it. Hang around for that, and we'll look forward to joining him soon. Thank you.